Welcome to Smacky's Garage. Today we're going to talk about the cost of ownership of a classic muscle car. We're going to use my 1969 Mustang here for an example as we walk through the fixed costs and variable costs to get a good idea of what it costs for a year of ownership. So let's get into it. So you found this video because you're probably interested in buying a classic muscle car. Classic muscle cars are great to own, they're great to drive, and as you're going to see in this video, they're not all that expensive to maintain and keep on the road every year. So we're going to break the cost of ownership into two areas. The first one is going to be the fixed costs. Fixed costs don't change as you drive the vehicle more or you use the vehicle more. Think about your insurance, think about any taxes on it. You know, if you drive it an extra 10 miles, they don't increase. And then we're going to talk about variable costs. So variable costs are costs that will increase the more you drive your vehicle or the more you use your vehicle. One of the things we're not going to talk about is cost of the vehicle. We're not going to include the cost of the vehicle in the calculations because it's a one-time fee when you get it, assuming like most people you're buying this, you're paying it outright in cash. There's probably some lenders out there for classic muscle cars, but you know, you're better off just buying it and paying it off. So our first fixed cost that we're going to talk about is insurance. So insurance, you know, this vehicle here has Hagerty insurance. I drive it maybe a few hundred miles a year, going to shows, taking it out, testing it. I pay around $600 a year. That includes access to Hagerty's Drivers Club. It includes everything that I need to cover this at an appraised value of probably like $50,000 to $60,000. The next cost we're going to talk about is registration. So in Massachusetts, you pay, for this vehicle, it's an antique registered vehicle, which means I'm paying a little bit of extra money for the plate. You know, it comes with certain stipulations where I don't drive it. I can't drive it as much. I think the only way you're allowed to drive it is you can't drive it to your office. You essentially need to only take it out when you're going to parades or if you are testing and tuning it on the road. You know, I do a lot of testing and tuning on the road for this car. I really don't stop too many places other than shows. If you're getting antique registration in your state, make sure that you know kind of what is included with an antique registration. So the next we're going to talk about inspections. Old classic cars need inspections. Depending on what state you're in, it may differ. In Massachusetts, they go through a safety inspection. So the safety inspection, you know, they check the suspension, they check the tires, they make sure that you have seat belts, it's safe to drive. So that costs $35 in the state. So if we look at all the fixed costs, you have your insurance for $600, you have your registration for $100, and then your inspection for $35. So that puts you at $735 in fixed costs for a muscle car like this a year. You know, those costs aren't going to go up if you drive the car more. It's not going to go down if you drive the car less. So that's what you end up paying. Let's get into the variable costs. So when looking at variable costs for this car, it's going to be costs that increase with the more you drive it and the more you use it. The first one that comes to mind that's really easy and really simple to know, it's fuel. You know, for myself, I probably drive this vehicle around 500 miles a year, so really not that much. You know, and if you figure premium is around $3.60 a gallon, and the car probably gets 9-10 miles per gallon, we'll use 9 miles per gallon to figure it out. You know, it ends up being kind of around $200 per year for fuel for this car. Now, depending on what car you're looking at, you know, you could have something more efficient. It could be a resto mod running a later engine. You're not going to be seeing 9 miles per gallon, but maybe you're higher, so your cost will be lower. Next, we're going to be talking about the fluids. So on this car for maintenance, you really don't spend that much on oil and fluids every year. You know, talking about power steering pump, checking and changing the oil in the engine, you're talking only about $50 a year, even if you're using the high-end stuff on this car. So for fluids, let's call it $50 a year. Now, the next item we're going to talk about is tires. So by themselves, you know, you don't replace your tires every year, but you need to budget for them every year. So if you're using this car a lot, you know, tires last maybe 5 to 7 years. You're talking about, you know, replacement cost, I'm going to call it an even $1,000. If you're doing it every 5 years, then you need to budget $200 per year in maintenance costs for the tires. That's typically what I do to cover it. You know, after tires start getting older, maybe 5 to 7 years, they get a little bit harder. they don't grip as much. So I always try to replace them in that time frame. That seems to be what works best for me and the tires that I buy. Now the last item we're going to talk about is car shows. So for car shows, I typically go to maybe around 5 a year, and I end up spending, let's call it $20 per show. That's typically a donation to get in. Sometimes it's an entrance fee. That's a variable cost. Really depends on what type of show you're going to go. So pulling this all together, we have $200 a year for fuel. We have $50 a year for maintenance. And I'm talking about like planned typical maintenance, not things breaking on the car. We have another $200 a year for tires and setting that money aside. And then lastly, we have $100 set aside for car shows. So adding all these up, you get $550 total in variable costs. You know, if you drive the car more, these costs will go up. If you drive the car less, these costs will go down. So pulling it all together, you end up with $735 in fixed costs, $550 in variable costs. You end up with $1,285 in costs to keep this on the road and to use it every year. It's really not that bad when you think about what you get to have, what you get to drive. You know, these cars here, they've been appreciating over the past few years. So overall, you're actually not doing too bad. I've always enjoyed owning classic cars. I mean, this is my first. I'm looking forward to my next. But anyone that has an opportunity to do so, I really encourage you to buy a classic car. It's an experience not like anything else. So let me know down in the comments what you're paying for your costs if you have a classic car. Let me know what you're paying for your insurance and maintenance, or if you think there's anything that I missed. Thanks for tuning in today on Smaky's Garage. See you next time.